Welcome back to the Severe Setup, everybody. Ian O'Neill, Harry Powell are back. We're back to talk some mixed martial arts. Not going to spend too much long on this weekend's UFC Apex card. We're getting straight into it here, Harry. Hope you're well. Not going to spend too much time. Main event, Tuivasa versus Marcin Tybura. We're going to have a quick run through the card here. And when I say quick, I mean quick, because this is not a great one. It's a bit of a come down. Look, we understand, blah, 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 blah. We talked about it before. This is it. This is what we're facing it. We're going to give it the time that we feel the card deserves, which is not that much. But we will be back on the breakdown. We will take a look at these fights and break them down as they happen after Saturday night. But yeah, not a great one, Harry, this time around. A little bit of a come down off of the Miami card, but a couple of ones that have a half interest. Starting off with the main event, quick analysis on that. I mean, two bangers here. You've seen Tai Tuivasa drinking shoeies at the WWE about 2 weeks ago. I mean, probably not the best preparation that you're going to have coming in for a fight, but nonetheless, here we are.
I think Tybura is slightly more well-rounded than our mate Tuivasa. However, look, both of these lads are big clangers. This is almost certainly not going to last five rounds, but it will probably get sloppy about 2.5 rounds in if it lasts that long, but I'm not even sure it lasts that long, to be honest. I'm actually not even sure who wins the fight either. My initial leaning was towards Tybura as just sort of the slightly more well-rounded fighter, but we know that Tai Tuivasa can crack, and so yeah, who knows? But an underwhelming main event, I think, mostly just that if one of these fellas wins, nothing happens. Just nothing happens divisionally, really.
I hope that we get to see like a good kind of slugfest early on, and this doesn't drag into the later rounds, because that's not what anybody needs in this fight. I think with Tuivasa, if he showcases any kind of level that he has been in recent years, obviously he's coming back off off 3 defeats, but against Cyril Gane, Sergey Pavlovich, and Alexander Volkov in his last fight, guys that you would expect Tai Tuivasa to lose against. I think Marcin Tybura is a guy you would expect him to win against, and I think he could go out there, put hands on him early, but things go well and then things don't go so well in a quick period of time in the heavyweight division, and that's what we're facing off with that co-main event. Not a great fight at all. I mean, we're really clutching at straws here for having Brian Battle in a co-main event. Angie Lusa fight off Reese McKee, and your trust into this spot. I mean, I don't even know what to say about this. It's not great, ain't it?
It's not great. No, I don't like. Ad nauseum, we have said this over and over and over again. I completely understand why there is a heavyweight main event of a fight night. I get why they did Jairzinho Rosenstruck. I get it. I don't like it, but I get it. But I don't understand what we are doing highlighting Brian Battle or Angie Lusa. I don't think the UFC are putting vast amounts of stock into Angie Lusa. I certainly don't think they're putting vast amounts of stock into Brian Battle. Obviously, Brian Battle has had some good performances in his UFC career thus far, but I don't see the UFC jumping on a bandwagon to say that Brian Battle is the next big thing for them. So yeah, just a very, very bizarre co-main event. Very bizarre.
Absolutely, yeah. I just can't think. I don't even have anything to say on that. Kennedy Nzechukwu versus Oven St. Pierre. Not much better in the 205-pound division. Christian Rodriguez versus Isaac Dulgarian. I was very, very impressed with Rodriguez in his win over Rahul Rosas Jr. Even more impressed of his win against Cameron Simon not so long ago, towards the end of last year. A fight that he did miss weight for, has to be said. He has missed weight in his last couple of fights, so I think with Rodriguez, the battle is with the scales now. But if he can make weight, if he can maintain that weight, putting a run together in the flyweight division, it might make it a little bit the featherweight division. He's an interesting guy, but he's got to be making weight. For Isaac Dulgarian, 6-0 in here. picked up a good win over Francis Fire Marshall via knockout, ground and pound. And, this has the potential of being an interesting stylistic matchup, but yet again, not enough jeopardy, really.
Not enough jeopardy. And equally, I think for somebody like Christian Rodriguez, you can't highlight that, as we already said, the problems with the scale. We have to fix the problems with the scale before we do anything else. Isaac Dulgarian, an interesting fighter, obviously big win in his last one. I just need to see more from both of them before I form an opinion, really.
Yep, definitely. Penny Kanzad versus Macy Chiasson in the women's bantamweight division. Gerald Mershart, 3GM, takes on Brian Barberena at 185 pounds. I mean, that has the shapings of a fun fight. It's going to be probably maybe a low level fun fight. You know what I mean? What do you think? Do you have excitement for that one? Not really.
No, I think Gerald Mershart subs Brian Barberena.
Yeah, maybe interesting. Yeah, interesting. Barberena obviously fighting up at middleweight there. He has lost his last 3, so yeah, tough times for Barberena. Needs a big win there. Mike Davis versus Nathan Levy. Jocelyn Nunez versus Chelsea Chandler. Nunez coming in at 10-1. I was very impressed with her in her last fight against Sarah.
Tough fight. That's a tough fight for Chelsea Chandler.
Yeah, very, very tough fight for Chelsea Chandler there. What else do we have here, Harry? Ode Osborne versus Jafel Fijalo, or Filho.
Fantastic. Yeah. Best fight on the card, in my opinion. Best fight on the card.
What intrigues you most about that fight, Harry?
Ode Osborne is long, knows how to fight, is such an inconsistent fighter. In that sometimes he's great and sometimes he's really, really not great. But he's long, he fights long, he can hit hard, he's got some nice grappling. Jafel Filo obviously impressed everyone with the Mohamed Bukayev performance, took Mohamed Bukayev all the way, injured Mohamed Bukayev with his inability to tap to that knee bar, or his unwillingness, to tap to that knee bar. And so, is Jafel Filo a really interesting division, addition to this 125-pound division, or is he you get a late notice fight, and you jump in and you do really well because there's no pressure on you? We're going to find out with Jafel Filo. And I think Ode Osborne is a really, really good guy to sort of figure that out, because he hits like a truck sometimes, performs really well sometimes. And so if Jafel Filo goes in and looks anywhere near as good as he did against Mohamed Bukayev, then we will know relatively quickly whether we have something or not.
Absolutely. Thiago Moises versus Mitch Ramirez at 155 pounds. I like Moises. I like seeing his name on a card. I think he's a guy who wins excitingly and a guy who loses excitingly. So obviously we've seen him last in there against Benoit Saint Denis. Give Benoit Saint Denis a little bit of trouble in round 1 and that fight before getting finished in the second round. So that's what I mean. Wins excitingly, loses excitingly. Be interesting to see how he does against Mitch Ramirez, who is coming in for his UFC debut. I mean, tough fucking debut for this guy here. Was this like, did the fight fall out for Moises? Or yeah, he was supposed to fake on Brad Riddell. That makes sense. Makes sense. This poor guy coming in, Mitch Ramirez, 8-1 against. That's a tough one to start off your UFC career, isn't it, Harry?
It is, but Mitch Ramirez hasn't made it to a judge's scorecard ever. And so, clearly a finisher. But I mean, yeah, if you're 8-1, you lose your Contenders Series fight by stoppage, and then you come in, you have one LFA performance, do well in that LFA performance. But this Thiago Moises is not LFA level. Like, this is a 17-7 fighter who is solidified in his UFC contract. And so, look, massive opportunity as well for Ramirez. If Ramirez comes here and beats Thiago Moises, that's a way to stamp your UFC debut. You know what I mean?
100%. Josh Culibao, coming off his loss by unanimous decision to Leron Murphy, takes on Danny Silva in the featherweight division. Silva coming in off the Contender Series there, so another test for him. Nothing really to write home about in that fight. Corey McKenna versus Jacqueline Amorim. This is an incredibly tough fight for Corey McKenna, I think. Harry, do you agree? Your fellow countrywoman.
Yeah, I do agree. Amorim has some really, really solid submissions from the bottom, but also hits hard, has a good gas tank. Amorim absolutely smashed Montserrat Conejero Ruiz to pieces in her last fight. Corey McKenna is known for being a slightly timid fighter, a slow starter. When she gets going, she can go, but in this fight, if she does not set the pace early enough, if she does not mix everything together early enough, then we will see her drop another decision. You know, her fight against Sam Hughes was so frustrating in that she just didn't grapple early enough. She didn't get going early enough. And Amorim is it's a big test. It's a big test.
Absolutely. Opening fight on the card just out of interest. Chad Anheller from Canada takes on Charalampos Grigoru. That's a fantastic name. That's probably really the biggest highlight of that fight is the Charalampos Grigoru. Grigoru. Yeah, fantastic name. I like that. Chad Anheller coming in, obviously a fellow Canadian like myself. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Off the back of 2 defeats. Really needs to kind of get a win here. The Dana White Contender Series alumni, like I said, top to bottom. We have to be honest here. Not really a great card. Let's hope that we see some exciting fights at least. Let's hope we have at least something to break down next Tuesday or next Monday. Yeah, but that's that card. But on to the next topic that we want to discuss today, Harry, and that's basically I say the current status of where we are at with mixed martial artists crossing over to boxing. Stemming off of the result of Francis Ngannou versus Anthony Joshua. It's all fresh in our minds. Anthony Joshua went out there and knocked out Francis Ngannou. With all due respect to Francis, and I hate even saying these words, he destroyed him in 2 rounds. And, all the credit in the world for Francis for creating situations like this, but at what cost? It's the cost of getting knocked out. It's the cost of leaving a part of yourself inside the ring that will never kind of come back. But I tell you something for nothing. I mean, to round it off, it's better to do it for 20 million than it is for 6 or 7 or 800,000 anyway that he was earning within the UFC. And I guess, that sparks the conversation. Where are we currently at, Harry, with this whole MMA crossover to boxing right now? What's your opinion on everything that's going down in recent times? And this is stemming off the fact of Sean O'Malley coming out and speaking about him wanting to go and fight Ryan Garcia and wanting to fight Floyd Mayweather. And, Sean talked about it on the big podcast last week, and I'm the same. You're the same as well. I would consider myself, not to speak for Shawnee and yourself as well, as MMA purists, and we want to see our best fighters fighting in mixed martial arts. And look, while it's understandable why they want to cross over to boxing and get that big payday, it's something that's really hurting the sport of mixed martial arts right now. And I'm very curious to hear what your thoughts on the current status. Obviously, we have had a history of this, but it's all very, very raw right now after what we've seen happen to Francis Ngannou.
I think the current status is that there are very, very, very few MMA fighters who could generate the purse that Francis Ngannou managed to generate. I think that it was very much a set of variables that were unique to Francis Ngannou that placed him in that situation to fight Tyson Fury in the first place. I think the result of that performance was very, very, very unique to Francis Ngannou. The performance against Anthony Joshua was what we expected to happen against Tyson Fury, right? It was that he went in against an elite level boxer as not an elite level boxer and got finished by an elite level boxer, right? I think that's really where we are as a current state. Going forward, what do I want to see? I think that there certainly are boxing bouts that Francis Ngannou could win if he so chose to stay in heavyweight boxing. I think we can forget names like Alexander Usyk. I think we can forget names, you know, where they're holding reverie in and around the world scene. Could he go and beat a Derek Chisora? Maybe. Could he go and beat there's that other fella that Anthony Joshua's fought a couple of times on the regional scene. Could he beat him? Maybe. Dylan White.
Dylan White,
Dylan White, exactly. Could he beat those sorts of fellas? Maybe, possibly, right?
Could possibly. He is the big question though, Harry, because that's a life-changing knockout in some terms. And the last time that we've seen Francis kind of go down like that or be defeated like that was against Stipe Miocic inside of the cage. And remember what happened in that fight after when he went in against Derek Lewis. He was like a rabbit in headlights. It really affected him mentally. Now, maybe he's done a lot of work to kind of correct those runs, and he certainly did correct it in the longer run. But to go in there and challenge yourself, even with the likes of Chisora and even with the likes of Dillian White, where you have tape on him now, and now the confidence is gone. Is it a thing where he might need to just maybe go back into MMA and take a fight just to kind of gain that confidence back, go back into his comfort zone? But it's very, very hard in his situation to kind of do that when they are dangling carrots and big money around. And I would imagine that, you know, there would be options where he could make multi-millions again, taking on the likes of those guys. I think the timing was perfect for him going over to boxing to kind of generate that kind of revenue, because let's be real, where that revenue is coming from is Saudi Arabia. They're funding these fights. So I don't think that, you know, someone like Eddie Hearn or someone like Bob Arum or who else, Al Heyman, any of those big boxing promoters, none of them are going to be shelling out 20,000 or 20 million to Francis to go over and box any of their guys. And that's the big thing. It's like he deserves to be getting paid as much as possible, but, you know, it's very hard and it's very difficult to kind of understand where his head is going to be at after what happened against Anthony Joshua. And just, any thoughts on that at all?
Look, I think boxing promoters will pay for Francis Ngannou to go, because you can still dine out right now on the Tyson Fury highlights. There is still that picture on his Instagram of Tyson Fury on the floor and Francis Ngannou stood over him, right? That still carries its weight. Not in gold, in silver right now. But if there is a fight that you can market for Francis Ngannou, I think there is one go round the merry-go-round again, right? And if he goes out and wins, if he beats a Derek Chisora, or he beats a Dillian White, or he beats a David Price, whatever, then sure, I think he can stay in. Do I want that to happen? No, absolutely not. I would much prefer that Francis Ngannou goes back to the PFL, fights Renan Ferreira, fights whoever it is that's next. Mixed martial arts is what got you to the dance, and I understand implicitly that you may feel jaded by MMA. Trust me, I know what that feels like. I know that he may feel like, look, he is 36 or something, 37. There's not that much time left in combat sports. Does he want to go and put in the time for an MMA camp? Does he want to do that to then turn down potentially a 10 million, a 5 million, a 6 million, whatever it is? We don't know, because it's not been proven that the PFL are able to pay the money with which they have promised Francis Ngannou, right? Whereas we know that Saudi Arabia can absolutely pay, and I know that the Saudi backed in the PFL anyway, but, you know, contracts and whatever. I hope Francis Ngannou comes back to MMA. I think that's my closing statement.
Yeah, I hope he does as well. And it's like, you know, based off what we know, he was offered 8 million per fight for the UFC. PFL have tried to match that. So you would think, you know, if he is going to get 8 million for his next fight with MMA, which I am not confident that he will, and the offer is 2 million for his opponent, are PFL going to be wanting to offer a guy like Renan Ferreira 2 million to fight somebody like Francis Ngannou? And number two, the whole cusp of the reasoning behind Francis Ngannou going to pay-per-view is to be part of the big pay-per-view series is that they want to do. And our fighter's going to be wanting to pay to see Francis Ngannou, especially after getting knocked out so devastatingly as well. It kind of takes some of the shine off of him. But then, you know, you do have that level of boxing crossover where they might want to see what he is doing in the cage based off what he did in the ring against Fury, not necessarily against Joshua. But it's like, I am also of the opinion too, Harry, is that I think there's a lot more mixed martial art fans that cross over to boxing than boxing fans crossing over to mixed martial arts, because I don't think the level of respect is there from the boxing community for mixed martial arts as it would be for mixed martial arts, and the level of their respect towards boxing.
Definitely. Couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more, which is why I think, you know, and maybe this is rude to say, but if Sean O'Malley goes and fights Ryan Garcia or Gervonta Davis or any of those fighters, he's going to get eaten alive. Like, it's not even slightly going to be close. It's going to be worse than when Conor fought Floyd, and it will not go well. I think the other thing, and this is, I guess, my underlying thought on this whole crossover thing, is it is a disgrace, an absolute disgrace for MMA fighters, elite level MMA fighters, to be forced to be desperate enough to have to go over to boxing in order to earn a real payday. That is an absolute disgrace.
And that's the core of the problem here.
Right.
And, you know, you have people out there that want to blame Conor McGregor. Oh, this is all Conor's fault. He started it. And this is not Conor McGregor's fault. This is the fault of the UFC and the current pay structure in the overall landscape of mixed martial arts. Again, you know, the UFC get labeled with this problem a lot because they are the premier organization. They're a multi-billion company, and they should tear the bulk of that responsibility and the bulk of that criticism. But it's a pay structure thing that exists throughout all the big promotions where, you know, in general, mixed martial artists aren't being paid as well as they should be. And it's like the reason Conor did it way back in the day and got the ball rolling on this was for the exact same reason as Francis did it. It's for the exact same reason as Tyron Woodley and Nate Diaz and everybody went over to box Jake Paul, is that they are not getting paid what they deserve to be paid under the current pay structure of mixed martial arts. I already know the answer to this question, but is there anything? I mean, we're looking ahead towards the UFC antitrust lawsuit. We're looking to the other kind of lawsuit that's coming after that. Is there any kind of hope that that structure might change in the coming years, Harry, in your eyes? Is there any kind of, you know, we've been very negative over the last 10 minutes and rightly so, but can you see a kind of a bright horizon? Can you see the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow here when it comes to maybe a slight improvements? Or, I mean, it's going to take a drastic improvement for somebody to be paid 20 million for one single mixed martial arts fight, unless you're Conor McGregor, I guess. But I mean, we need to try and make baby steps to the ultimate goal here. And I don't know, it doesn't look too good, but maybe with this antitrust lawsuit, things might change. What do you think?
Yeah, so I think with the antitrust lawsuit, like, okay, is it going to be immediate pay in a fighter's pocket at the end of it? No, maybe not, right? But I think that the way in which the UFC will make change is through its wallet, right? And so if the antitrust lawsuit does cost the UFC an incredible amount of money, which is currently being bandied about, then the UFC will do a cost-based analysis. And I suspect they will anyway. And they will say, we don't really want to go through this again. Because if they lose the lawsuit, then a precedent is set in law, right? And the precedent that is set is that the UFC must abide by a certain level of treatment for fighters. Now, does that mean, like we've talked and we've seen that the UFC have taken the
UFC, I think, listening to Graham and John, and I don't want to butcher this at all, but I think the UFC have combated that in all of their newest contracts in some way. And like I said, you know, that's kind of a way that they've created that way for them not to be cut out in this manner again, which doesn't bode too well and for what we're hoping for either, in fighters being treated a little bit better and paid a little bit better if they're already trying to cover their tracks and ensuring this doesn't happen again. Like, I mean, to ensure this doesn't happen again, one way of doing it is paying these guys more, just simply biting down and paying them a fair share of the pie. But the other end of the stick, and the most likely end of the stick that we're going to be dealt with, is that they are going to have that small writing in the contracts that no fighters will be able to come back and sue them or come at them for a lawsuit for any damages down the line. So I mean, it'd be interesting to see, and I think it's a grim couple of years ahead in terms of, be interesting to see what happens with the lawsuit, but what the UFC are going to do to counteract that, or what are they going to do to maybe gain some of the money that they've lost as well, because is gaining some of the money that going to lost cost or be a reason for to take advantage of some of the newest up and coming fighters in the UFC. I think we've seen the UFC try to structure themselves where they're not trying to build stars to the level of Conor McGregor anymore. I think that's one way of combating it. But I mean, after everything, a lot to unpack there, Harry. Just what you're thinking on all of that kind of situation.
Yeah. So my original point was going to be about the new contracts and how the UFC are sort of circumnavigating the potential of a lawsuit before or sort of after. But I think that I don't know is the honest answer. Like it's so hard given that it seems, at least to me, so obvious that the fighters need to look for collective bargaining. It is so obvious that together they could put something in place where they could all profit, but it doesn't seem as though that is going to happen. It doesn't seem like that can happen for a number of different reasons. In terms of what do I think happens in the future, I mean, I would like to think that the UFC would, if they lose the lawsuit, would take it upon themselves to try to improve the landscape of mixed martial arts. But given the indications that has been taken either in the contract situations that we've already talked about, but also in some of the way that they deal with fighters right now, I don't hold any hope for that, which again just dismays me dramatically just of MMA as a whole, right? We have people like Ilia Topuria, we have people like Sean O'Malley, we have Alexander Volkanovski, we have these sorts of absolute cream of the crop elite level athletes in our sport. And this is a slightly different point, but you look at Tyson Pedro a couple of weekends ago, comes in after losing and says, I'm gonna have to quit mixed martial arts, I'm gonna have to quit my athletic endeavor because I literally can't afford to survive. And that, I think, is a very, very, very bleak outlook. But one thing that I think also that should be said is more than ever now, fighters have a larger platform. And when they do say things like this publicly, obviously Tyson Pedro couldn't give a shit, right? There's nobody, if he is retiring, there's nobody that's going to tell him, oh, you're going to get a tough fight next time, or you're going to do this, or you're going to do that. But the more that fighters are willing to speak out about these things on a larger platform, the more that becomes into the sort of the public zeitgeist, I guess.
Yeah, I think we'd be a little bit foolish to think that the UFC are going to be looking after the greater good of mixed martial arts. I think at the time, they did concentrate on that because it was in their best interest. But what's in their best interest and what they want more than anything right now is to line their pockets with as much money as they can. And look, there was another thing that we're going to talk about. Maybe we'll touch on it for a bit. We can talk about it again. It's that, how did they do that? How did they make money? Well, they want to put on as many big fights as they can. And in recent years, we have seen champs versus champs. And now we are seeing more activity with fighters moving up in weight. Obviously, the boxing crossover, the champions move up in weight. It all falls back on the original idea of Conor McGregor. But, you mentioned Ilia Topuria, you mentioned Sean O'Malley there. We kind of spoke about it on the breakdown as well. It's a real problem that we're having in mixed martial arts where we're not having champions defend titles anymore within their weight classes, and part of the reason is that down to financially as well, because what is better than a champ versus champ fight? Well, what's better than a champ versus champ fight is not having Sean O'Malley, who's defended his title once, and not having Ilia Topuria, who hasn't defended his title yet, go and defend it a couple of times or fight without defending their title. I think they need to go and fight a couple of times, defend their title, and it makes that fight bigger. Now, that being said, Conor, when he originally made the move, didn't defend his title either, but I think he was a different juggernaut at that time. But it seems to be a trend in marketing and promoting and trying to sell us entertaining fights that the fans want to see, rather than giving a guy like Merab his title shot, or giving a long-time champion Alexander Volkanovski a rematch as well. And it's a real problem within mixed martial arts, kind of accumulates under the problem of wanting to earn as much money you can. And maybe this is something that we have to deal with. Yeah, if we want our fighters to stay in mixed martial arts and not cross over to boxing, maybe we have to settle with them winning a title and wanting to jump up and down weight classes and not defending their titles accordingly, like we have seen great champions do in the past, like your Anderson Silvas, your Jose Aldos, your GSPs, etc., etc. We've really gone far away from that style of champion in the UFC, and it's a little bit worrying too as well, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's just, I think, entirely down to money. Like the UFC, as we've talked about, maybe less so now because the UFC, the TV deal, sorry, is coming up for expiration. But the UFC have never cared less about pay-per-view numbers. Obviously, they still want to do the best pay-per-views that they possibly can. But the reason why the fighters are pushing for champ versus champ is because if they, as fighters, have pay-per-view points in their contract, which more often than not is only negotiable either when you're fucking Conor McGregor or when you're a champion, right? When you're a champion, there's a negotiation for pay-per-view points. Pay-per-view points are where fighters make their real money. If you are, let's say, Israel Adesanya, right, who had 6 title defenses, if you're Israel Adesanya and you are trying to drum up as much sort of reverie for your opponents as possible, that means pay-per-view points. The easiest route to pay-per-view points is you call the fella up that's above you or below you, and you try and create some rivalry there at a championship level, because champ versus champ always sells, unless we have a Conor McGregor, Jose Aldo, or we have a Alex Pereira versus Israel Adesanya type of storyline, because at the end of the day, what sells fights is stories, right? It's narratives, and the fighters understand that. Now, again, the UFC win hand over fist in this scenario too. They don't necessarily care about pay-per-view money because they have a portion of that already squared away for themselves. Yeah. But if you want to tell me that they are not happy with Sean O'Malley and Ilia Topuria chatting it up and thinking we could do a stadium in Spain here, or we could do this, or we could do that, or we could do the Las Vegas Sphere, or we could do whatever it is and charge an exorbitant amount of money and get an exorbitant amount of pay-per-view buys, then of course they're going to take that, right? Of course they're going to take that. So this comes from, as you said, the desperation for fighters to be paid what they are worth. It comes from the desperation of the UFC being unrelentingly and unwillingly, and MMA being unrelentingly and unwillingly, because I should say, you make a very, very, very good point in that the UFC take a lot of flack, but this is an MMA problem and not just a UFC problem, to pay fighters in a revenue share that is more akin to the competitors that the UFC have right now, which is the NBA, the NFL, MLB, these sorts of things. And until that is resolved, which I genuinely don't see a way for it to be resolved, then fighters are going to continue to look for and scratch at the sides of the most lucrative revenue streams, whether that's champ versus champ, whether that's boxing MMA crossover, whether, whatever that thing is, the fighters are going to look to do it until they are paid significantly at home. And I just don't see when, why, or how that's going to be.
Yeah. It's something we wanted to talk about. Not that positive of a subject, not a really positive path forward, to be honest, but something that we both wanted to talk about today on the Severe Setup, and I'm glad that we did. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks, Harry, for all of your insight and everything like that. And I guess, if you're listening and there is any other topics you want us to talk about or anything like that, I guess, we tried to keep it as pressing issue as possible. I think the chat about the crossover really is ringing the bell because of that Francis and AJ fight. And, Sean O'Malley was actively calling out Ilia Topuria instead of calling out Merab Dashvili. So I think, you know, there were 2 things that were on our mind that we wanted to discuss. Hope you enjoyed it. At BJJ_Harry Powell, at O'Neill MMA. That was your severe setup. Enjoy the fights this weekend. We'll be back for the breakdown next week.